Greetings, everyone, to another episode of Kevin Live and what will eventually become the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad, so excited that you're here. If you're here with us live, I hope that you will start by going into the comments section of whatever social platform you're on right now and say hello and tell us where you're from. That'll be awesome to know that and for people to get to sort of know each other as we get ready to have this conversation. And so while you're here with us live, I want you to imagine that you're joining Nick and I for a cup of coffee. So if you've got a question, a comment, an idea, I know that those will make for better conversation, will give me some feedback along the way to know what you might want me to continue to talk about or us to continue to talk about. And eventually, all of that, your input, your participation will make for a better podcast episode. And if you're joining and you don't know what I'm saying when I say podcast episode, this will eventually be turned into an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And to do that, we won't include what I've just said for the last minute and 10 seconds, but rather we'll trim it here in just a second. So what I'm going to do now, as you are in the chat, typing where you're from, and there we see, hello, Fabian from Miami. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a countdown, and this will be where we'll trim this for the podcast, and the podcast will begin, and we'll be live. We'll continue to be live in 3, 2, 1. This is an exciting day. This is a chance for us to talk about something that we all want to get better at. How do we make things happen in whatever size our organization is? We're going to use a word to describe that in a second. But for now, I just want you to think about, would you like to get more accomplished? Would you like to get more done wherever you happen to be located, especially if it feels like you get stymied and you get stuck in the organizational mire? Well, if that's a challenge for you or something you'd like to help your team get through, you are in exactly the right place. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If you are listening to this podcast, you could have been with us live. We can't send us all back to the future, but you can find out about future live episodes and join us on your favorite social channel. You can get those live episodes and interact with us, see them sooner, in this case, almost 2 months earlier, by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to make that happen. Today's episode is brought to you by Virtual LeaderCon. On September 12th through 15th, I will have conversations with 30 experts over 4 days, everyone designed to help you become a more effective leader and human being. If you're with us live, you can sign up for full access for free. And if you missed it, you can gain lifetime access to the archive for what you missed or if you want to listen again. Consider this like a podcast on serious steroids. Virtual LeaderCon, September 12th through 15th. All details, registration can be found at virtualleadercon.com. And with that, I'm going to bring the man you came for into the room. Here he is. His name is Nick Sinai. Let me introduce him, and then we're going to dive in. And Nick, before I even do that, we've got people here from Saudi Arabia and from Ontario and Michigan and Miami and Dallas, and I don't know where all else. Let me introduce all of you to Nick Sinai. He's a venture capitalist and adjunct Harvard faculty and a former senior White House official in the Obama administration. As a senior advisor at Insight Partners, he serves on the board of Rebellion Defense, Hawkeye 360, Leo Labs, and Shift 5. He writes and teaches about technology and government and served as a commissioner on the Atlantic Council's Commission on Remaking the U.S. Defense Innovation System. He's been quoted in The Economist and the Wall Street Journal and has testified in front of Congress. He's recently co-founded U.S. Digital Core, a new 2-year federal fellowship for early career technologists launched in the summer of 2021. And what he didn't say in his bio is, and one of the reasons he's here is, he's the co-author of a brand new book called Hack Your Bureaucracy. Get things done no matter what your role on any team. He's going to hold it up as well. And so welcome, Nick. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hey, Kevin. Really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I teased it in the open and didn't use the B word. We'll get to the B word in a second. But before we get there, I'd really like to have you tell us, I mean, the intro kind of gives us a pretty exciting view of your story, but how did you end up here in the very short term, in a very short way? Sort of tell us a little bit about your journey. How do you end up being in the Obama administration? Sort of how do you end up there? Like a little bit about your path.
Yeah, so it's a really short story where I was on the first day of my honeymoon in Italy. Open up the newspaper and it says Lehman Brothers goes bust. The only problem is I just joined Lehman Brothers Venture Partners, the venture capital arm of Lehman Brothers. I was 9 months into a new job in the Boston area, and I was like, "Honey, you thought you married a venture capitalist?" And
maybe not.
Maybe not. We decided to enjoy the honeymoon in Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast, but then we came back to the Boston area, and I naively thought I'm going to go get a job in the Obama administration and do a little bit of a mid-career pivot. I was in my early 30s. I had been management consultant, business school, and then venture capital, and I was going to go get a job in the Obama administration, not realizing how naive that was, that everybody and their mother wanted to get a job in the Obama administration. He was making government cool again, and managed to talk my way into a job at the FCC as part of the National Broadband Plan, one of these blue ribbon task force, and then ultimately got hired at the White House in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and got promoted to be the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer. Impressive sounding title. I know my mother was very impressed. My wife was impressed. Yeah, and so the story of this book is in part some of the stories that I had. My co-author Marina Nitsa, she worked with me in the White House and then was at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's actually a Fortune 10 size enterprise with 400,000 employees, so it's a really good size organization that takes care of our nation's veterans. And so the book is really a bunch of our stories and the stories of some of our friends and fellow bureaucracy hackers.
And so that's where I want to go there next. First of all, this book is full of great stories. It's full of relatable stories, even if you've never worked in the government or never care to work in the government. And they're not all stories about the government, but they're all revolve around this word that you told me, and you mentioned early in the book, that people said you shouldn't use this book in this word in the title of a book. So I want you to tell me what you'd mean by the word bureaucracy.
Yeah, Kevin. So, bureaucracy is just an organization that has rules, that has subject matter experts, that has defined processes. And generally speaking, we think of mid-size or large organizations. They can be public sector, government agencies, but they can also be private sector. I think just about any organization over time turns into a bureaucracy, and we tend to shy away from the word. But if you look at there are actually scholars who look at this thing, and they talk about the standardization of process. So if you have a standard sales process, if you have a standard support process, even a smaller organization can become bureaucratic in how it makes decisions or how it standardizes kind of what it does. And so most people live inside or alongside bureaucracies. You think about your city government, you think about your PTA, your homeowners association. Many of us work in school districts, in universities, in mid and large size companies. Those are all bureaucracies in some form or fashion. And so understanding them and knowing how to make change and improve them is fundamentally relevant to so many of us around the world.
So speaking of around the world, we've got lots of people here from around the world. So I'm just going to have a little fun with the folks here that are live. If you're with us live in the comments, wherever you're at, just say yes if you've ever been a part of something you would call a bureaucracy, where maybe there have been times when you've been frustrated or wished that you could make more happen. Just a simple yes is all we need. We'll just see if we get any. Now more people are telling us where they're located, but I'm just curious if we get any yeses, Nick. What I want to do is say that this book, by my count, at the end, I think there are 56 hacks. At the end of each chapter, there's a bunch of other specific stuff, but I think there are 56 if I counted right. And so what I'd like to do is just walk through some of these and get your take on some of them. You can share some things, some stories perhaps about them as we go. But before we do that, I just want to give you my observation and let you speak to this. while we're waiting for these comments to come in, which are starting to come in. My take on this book is this is a great book about being practically proactive, being proactive in a practical way. So reactions to that, anything you want to say about that word proactive, sort of as we get started?
I think it's a great summary of the book. We like to say that it's not your CEO or in our case the President of the United States that can simply declare change. It's really up to you, and whether you're starting in an organization, if you're this is the beginning of your career, whether you're mid-level or whether you're a senior executive, new or established, it really is on you to make change, and that's not by yourself. It is how do you band together, both with traditional and non-traditional people inside your organization. But really, we wanted to get away from the idea of the leader comes down with change on high and then everything just happens. And that's just not the way the world works. And we've seen this in big companies, in small companies, in venture capital backed companies, in the White House, at Harvard. Everywhere I go, I see that it is the people who take change upon themselves and are proactive in very practical ways, as you say, Kevin. Those are the folks who start to build some momentum, maybe build some unlikely allies. Something we touch on a lot in the book, and build momentum for change. And then ultimately, are they able to use the way the bureaucracy actually works to instantiate that change at scale?
And eventually maybe even get a whiteboard, but that's a story for once you read the book. But you see, I put on the screen a bunch of people that said yes, Nick, including a member of my team. I'm hoping she's saying yes. She's only been with us for a year, so I'm hoping that that's from a yes from a past life and not from the last year. So I just want to dive into some of these, and I'm going to put these up, and just so everybody knows, Nick doesn't know which of these I've decided to put up here. And some of them I'm putting up are the sort of the title of the chapter, and some of them aren't. And the first one is not the title of the chapter, but it's about what you called, and I love this phrase, water cooler rules. So what do you mean by those? And what's some quick advice about how we can deal with them? Because we've all experienced these. Go ahead.
Yeah, in any organization, there are what we call water cooler rules, and those are simply the kind of cultural established ways of doing things that become constraints sometimes, especially as the world changes, right? And so what we counsel is trying to understand, where is it written down? Going back to the source. Is that something that is in the employee handbook? Is that something that the CEO has said, this is the way we're going to do? Is that a documented process inside your organization? Or is it just something that has, traditionally always been that way? And it's important to understand, how written in stone are these? And even things that are written in stone, they aren't written in stone and coming down from Mount Sinai. They still can be changed. I've seen laws be changed, and everyone says how hard it is to change laws. So, first is to understand: are they water cooler rules, or are they actual written policies that are documented in your company or organization or government agency, university, what have you?
Yeah, and so when they're water cooler, when they're not written, when they're just sort of, this is the way we've always done it, give us one quick tip of something we could do once we know that that's what it is. You've sort of laid that out for us, but once we know that that's what it is, what's a piece of advice that we could take, given that, hey, this isn't written, this is just sort of standard operating procedure?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to tackle that. One is to show somebody that it can be done the other way, right? If you're able to actually have a prototype, a demonstration, an example of where you've done it the other way, I think that can be a powerful way to kind of show that the water cooler rules don't necessarily apply because you've been able to accomplish it there. You can actually go find the source documents and say, hey, look, we all thought this was the way that things had to be done, but I've actually looked up the law. I've looked up the statute. I've looked up the employee handbook, and it doesn't say that we can't do that. So why don't we try this other way? So I think sometimes people just assume they haven't done their own homework and looked for the documented rule. So just going back to the source and showing people that, I think sometimes helps people relax constraints. Something we talk a lot about in the book is how do you get people to relax constraints? And that's the thing about working in any organization, but particularly ones of some size or ones of some age, is we tend to think that the constraints are more fixed than they are. Right?
It's in the policy manual, but apparently it was written in 1963. It possibly could be changed now, right? So one of the things that you talk a lot about is the idea of a one-pager. So how I think we can know what a one-pager is. You're writing a one-page summary, but like, how can we use those to help us move the needle, move the ball, make change in organizations?
Yeah, I think written one-pagers are supremely helpful in getting people to buy into a particular idea, to get feedback on a particular idea, to make sure you're all talking about the same thing. I mean, I think we've all been in companies or organizations where people are talking about their idea, pitching a particular idea, and then when it's actually written down, maybe it's not quite the same. It's 80% of that idea, and you can just imagine this game of telephone when you're trying to socialize an idea or get buy-in. And so one of the quickest ways to do that is to write it down, and a one-pager requires a sharpness. And this is not original to me. I think Adam Grant and many people have talked about just the power of writing things down and how that actually sharpens your thinking. And it forces you to realize, oh, maybe this assumption that I have hasn't really been proven, or maybe I need a more accessible anecdote or more accessible statistic, or what I think is a real problem is not something that the rest of the organization really is centered on. And so how do I show everyone else that this is important? And so putting this all down on a single piece of paper that is legible, interesting, exciting, and compelling, that's hard. And so our advice is try it out, share it with a colleague or a friend and get their reaction. And your one pagers will get better. But also in the course of sharing a one pager about a particular, I mean, this could be a policy, it could be a project, it could be a new initiative, a new market you want to enter, it could be a reform you want to do, a new procedure, what have you. But sharing that with some colleagues and getting their feedback is also one of these techniques to kind of socialize an idea, right? Because if they provide some feedback and you incorporate some of that feedback, then you've started to show that you're listening to them, and that you're kind of building an authentic relationship. And it's not that you can take everyone's criticism, but the more that you kind of show that you are listening, incorporating the relevant feedback, and explaining to people why you are perhaps not incorporating their feedback, that creates an even more powerful written document that, as you continue to socialize it, it can get a lot of buy-in. And let's face it, what organizations of any size dislike are surprises. And one of the ways to help combat surprise is to write it down, either in a written memo or in a one pager.
Yeah, and I love where you started with this, and I completely agree. That is, thoughts are fuzzy, words bring clarity, and when we have to get sharp enough to get it in one page, we get a more clear idea of our own thinking, and then all of the rest that you shared, Nick, I completely agree. So in the world of technology where you live, people like to think about things being in beta. In the book, you talk about people doing a test, or doing a beta, or doing a pilot. So I'd like you to talk about the power, what I'm going to call the power of the pilot. And I'm not talking about the guy or gal that flies a plane. Like, give us an example. I mean, we all know what a pilot is. Give us an example from the book or otherwise about when someone used this idea and it helped them move people faster.
Yeah, one of the stories we tell in the book is of Enrique Odi. Enrique is actually a colonel in the Air Force, and the idea is to build some software that actually helps the Air Force schedule retankers, or tankers, I think they're called, these tankers refuel planes in air. And this sounds incredible, but the way the Air Force was scheduling them in the Middle East was essentially on a whiteboard. And so, sure, they had plenty of software here and there, but for this critical task of actually scheduling where these are massive, massive planes that are filled with fuel, and they fly around in the air, and the various fighter jets kind of dock with them and refuel. And so scheduling those were critically important to the operations of the U.S. Air Force in any theater. And in this case, they were fighting ISIS at the time. And this particular task was done by a bunch of airmen on a massive whiteboard. They're drawing it out and planning where the tankers would go and how much fuel they would carry, and et cetera. And the three-star general, this is in Qatar, at an Air Force base there, was saying like the most important thing was not to erase the whiteboard. And so Enrique Odi,
the whiteboard that says "Do not erase." Right?
Exactly. Can you imagine? And so Enrique basically used this idea of a pilot of why don't we just build the small little functionality and show the Air Force that there's a better way to build software and there's a better way to do this. And they actually got it from idea to working software in under 6 months, 4 months from when they really started. And so that was record time to deliver a real capability back out to the field. And it's an example of they ended up not trying to solve everything about the way the Air Force manages planes, but just the small scheduling piece to it is little piece. And when you show progress, as Enrique and his colleagues did, they then got more resources and they actually founded a whole unit to build software differently for the Air Force. But they started small and they built momentum.
They didn't say we need a whole unit of people to build software for the Air Force. They built something, right? So one of the things that I could go back to the folks who are here live and say, have you ever experienced a silo in the workplace? And everyone would say yes again. And I would say that now that more people are working from home, that there are even personal silos that people are building up around their own work in some cases. But one of the things in the book that you talk about is the idea of looking between the silos. So what does that mean? How do we use that idea?
Yeah. So when you think about any organization, there's like a bunch of functional areas of sales and marketing, HR, legal, et cetera. And they tend to do their core function pretty well, or at least they know how to do that core function. But it is in that handoff between functions or between geographic areas, right? Those are ripe with opportunity, because that's where, whether it's an employee experience, whether it's a customer experience, sometimes that's where things fall down. And so understanding how those different units or groups of people, how they hand things off or don't in many cases is a great place to look for, where to make improvements. And so my co-author, Marina Nitsa, she was in the VA. She was actually the youngest chief technology officer of the VA. She was age 28 when she first got there. So she was this whiz kid. And she very much found these silos where you could be a veteran who was receiving great healthcare, but knew nothing about the benefits, all of the programs and benefits that the VA provided to veterans. And so looking in between these two silos, you're able to say, well, wait a second, while we're providing this world-class medical care, can't we also let veterans know about the benefits that they've earned? And that seems simple, but when you have a health administration and a benefits administration inside this larger organization, sometimes there's this opportunity between the silos.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, every organization, nearly every organization that we've ever worked with, that word will come up. Well, we got silos here. And so I think looking for those handoffs and those places between, I think, is a really, really good advice. And it's a great example. So everybody knows most organizations have an org chart, right? And we also know that the org chart isn't necessarily a picture of how things really work, where we are. So one of the other strategies that you suggest is to know the real org chart? What do you mean?
Look, the formal org chart is just a bunch of boxes and lines. And these are real human beings who have real lived experiences. Some of them are consulted more than others on important decisions. Information flows in various ways, and the seniority or the organization of the org chart is only one small piece of what an organization is really about, and how organizations make decisions. The thing that's really not on an org chart are the incentives and risks of each human being, right? And so, like, look, we're human, and so each individual is motivated by different things, and sometimes it's recognition or money, or sometimes it's not wanting to stand out, or fear of being singled out, or right, or wanting to be known as a change agent, or lack thereof. I mean, whatever the motivations are, and whatever some of the risks that people face or perceive, right? That's all not on the org chart, and so we counsel people to think about kind of creating their own org chart as they talk to people, understanding what motivates them. Because if you're ultimately going to build authentic relationships and pay it forward and help people out, you have to understand kind of what matters to them. Because if they're going to help you on their project, you want to have, as much as possible, try to help them on their initiative. And if you don't understand them, and you don't understand kind of how the org chart really works, then you're kind of not doing yourself any favors.
One of the things that I think is now obvious to any of you who are listening is that this book is about strategies and tactics, but ultimately this book is about people. And that if we're going to hack a bureaucracy, we have to have better understanding of the motivations of others, but also building relationships with others to make some of that happen. Reaction to that observation?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Kevin. I think there's a quote from one of my students. I'm also an adjunct at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and there's a quote from one of my students about how institutions and bureaucracies are rigid, but people are not. And so the more that you get to know people, and that people get to really trust you in terms of what your motivations are, what your values are, what your judgments are, those kinds of things, the more they are willing to show you new paths through the bureaucracy or through the organization, and say, well, we have this other authority, or we have this little known program, or we could do A, B, and C instead of this other way. So the more that you get to know people as human beings, the more they are going to show you ways to navigate your organization. And you may not have taken advantage of all that your organization has to offer. That's another thing that we talk about in the book, is oftentimes there are a variety of resources, especially in larger, older organizations. And it's simply understanding kind of those edge cases and how those resources could be marshaled in your context, even informally. That's key.
We're talking with one of the co-authors of the new book, Hack Your Bureaucracy. For those of you that are here live, it's not available yet, but I'm sure you could pre-order. Hack Your Bureaucracy. Here it is. I strongly encourage you to get a copy, because if you've ever been stuck in the systems of your organization, this will help you get unstuck. So, Nick, before we finish, a couple of other questions for you. And one is, we're going to leave the book for a second, and I'm going to ask you, like, what do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Well, I am a pretty lousy golfer.
How did I know? When people start with the word lousy, it usually ends up being golf.
Well, I was a private pilot, and it's one of those things where you have to keep flying, and you have to be a pretty good pilot, but you can be a lousy golfer. I have 9-year-old twin girls, and so I like to coach their soccer on weekends, and yeah.
Perfect. Another thing that we talked about in our short conversation before we started is one of the things that we have in common is we're readers. And the only question I told you I was going to ask you is this one. So Nick, what are you reading these days? Share with others. We'll make sure for those of you watching the podcast, we'll have this in the show notes. What are you reading?
Yeah, I actually, because you gave me advance warning of a handful of minutes, I actually grabbed a couple books from my nightstand. So this is, I have the receipts to show. So one is Cass Sunstein's Sludge. And so this is about the kind of administrative burden when you're filling out forms, whether on websites, right? And so how do we get rid of that essentially time tax, which I think is super important in social democracies and the welfare state, and how do you provide benefits, because it becomes so complicated to do that. If you're a person of more means, you end up hiring accountants, you end up hiring people to deal with that sludge. But if you're of low income, you're trying to navigate a lot of bureaucracy and forms yourself. So Sludge is a good one. The other one that I'm reading, The Man Who Broke Capitalism, how Jack Welch gutted the heartland. And this is fascinating. I went to business school, and of course, Jack Welch and shareholder value was kind of seen as this primary model. And this book is kind of diving into how that was detrimental to capitalism, long-term capitalism, and how we might pivot from that.
So Nick, we got a little feedback there. Nick, where can we learn more? Where do you want to point people? If people want to get a copy of the book, where do you want to point people if they want to learn more, connect with you, etc.?
Yeah, please go to our website, hackyourbureaucracy.com. Please go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, wherever you buy books. It's available for pre-order. It comes out soon. Really excited. So please, we have a mailing list. You can sign up for that as well.
hackyourbureaucracy.com. Now I have a question for all of you. I'm almost done with Nick, but I have a question for all of you who are watching or listening. And the question is this. Whoops. Now what? What are you going to do as a result of this? I mean, you just got a masterclass in tactics that you can apply to help you get unstuck, to get things done wherever you sit in an organization, whatever your role is. And so which one are you going to go apply first? Chances are there's something that leaves you frustrated or leaves you confounded or is keeping you from making the progress that will serve both you and the organization. And so the question is, where are you going to start? And whether that's writing a one-pager, or whether that's looking between the silos, or whatever that might be. If you don't take action on this, what was sort of the point? I mean, because Nick and I are entertaining, but listen, you could have, if only all you wanted was entertainment, you probably could have done better than the two of us. So Nick, I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing some of your knowledge and some of your wisdom and some of your experience with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a treat.
And so everybody, before we go, just want to remind you that we're here every week. And so you want to come back for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everyone.